Hello, this is the fourth part of the series Cruising in the 20th Century. This part is nearly all in black and white and covers, as the title suggests, cruises in the 20s and 30s, all of which were shot in Orient Line and P&O ships. Because the original film had no soundtrack, it's difficult to know exactly where some of the ports visited are, and in my commentary I may be making an intelligent guess. You'll see pictures of the ships at anchor or in port, scenes around the ship, and shots of the passengers enjoying themselves on deck and visiting the shore. You may well be amused at the dress code, particularly of the ladies, some of whom still wore their furs despite the Mediterranean sunshine. Very little of this film has been shown before. It's mostly amateur shots taken by the passengers themselves on 16mm cameras and converted to DVD. It portrays those halcyon days before World War II. As we watch the Orford sailing away into the distance, sit back now and enjoy it. The blue ensign flies as we start our first cruise in Otranto to Norway. The sun is out and the passengers are enjoying a stroll on the promenade deck, B-deck. At lunchtime, it's warm enough to have an on-deck buffet. Or if you prefer it, you could have a nice cool drink on deck and then go down for lunch in the dining saloon. Drink up now, the boys are bugling the lunch call. And now there are more choices to be made. After a day at sea, we make our first landfall. The crew prepare the boats to take the passengers ashore. And it's not long before they're landed and ready to take an excursion up into the country. Some will go by train, while others take a coach. The melting snows provide plenty of water for hydroelectric schemes. And then it's time to go back to the ship, with a chance to relax and play games, etc., until the next day. On this particular excursion, passengers were lucky enough to see a herd of reindeer. And after a break for refreshments, they walked to a glacier. The following day they arrived in Bergen and visited the fish market. This market was severely damaged in the 1950s by fire, but has since been rebuilt and flourishes well to this day. Some of the passengers are going to take the train to Oslo. Others will tour the spectacular scenery, with waterfalls cascading down into the fjords below. For those going back to the ship, there's a few more days to enjoy deck games, admire the scenery, and then it'll be back home. We'll leave Otranto and join Orontes on a Mediterranean cruise. Final goodbyes, the bags are packed, and we're off to the ship. An announcement on board says all visitors ashore. The ship is now ready to sail. All the passengers are asked to attend lifeboat drill. Once that's over, there's time to stroll around the upper decks. Let's write a postcard home to the family, telling them what a wonderful time we're having. We can post it in Gibraltar, our first port of call. We pick up a gharry which will take us into the town. There's time to buy a few souvenirs, and we're reminded of the importance of the military to the fort of Gibraltar. The sun's out and the passengers are on deck playing deck games, quite tennis in this case. You'll notice how smart they look in their whites. It's not like that on today's cruise ships. Anything goes. Now here's where I have to start guessing. Passengers have come ashore by boat in a port which could be Madeira. There certainly seems to be some Portuguese influence. You'll see the policeman's uniform in a little while. And then the ox carts. It might, on the other hand, be some port in southern Spain, although I must say the policeman's uniform looks wrong if that's the case. It's certainly not a particularly affluent area. Once back on the ship, passengers come out again to play deck quoits in this case. You see again how smart they are. Diving is dangerous, but in other pictures people seem to dive regardless. A day or two later, land comes into sight again. The sailor, you'll see, is sounding the bottom. There's no depth sounding equipment in those days. They're standing by to let go the anchor. For you ship buffs, we can now watch as the anchor runs out. Then it's off ashore again, once more in the ship's boats. This time we're in North Africa, and my guess is Ceuta, which at this time was Spanish Morocco. Another day, another port. And again I have to turn to guessing, but I would say this was southern Spain. Not Barcelona, because we shall see that later. You'll get the flavour of the local conditions. Back on the ship again, and it's time for the fancy dress party. Orontes is at anchor, and the passengers are going to leave again in the ship's boats to go ashore. There are several scenes here, and the first is in Palma, Mallorca. We get a good glimpse of Palma Cathedral. It's difficult to imagine these days, with our TVs and Xboxes, etc., how children amuse themselves in those times past. Here's a couple of examples. We move on to Barcelona. Whilst many of the attractions in Barcelona have stayed much the same, you'll see as we go into the back streets in this film that there's a great deal of difference between then and now. Bullfighting was and is still a big attraction in Spain, although I think it is fair to say that its popularity is beginning to wane, which to my mind is not a bad thing at all. But since we're looking at the period before the war, I think it's only right to include this clip. As Orontes heads for home, passengers are entertained with deck sports, and some just use the facilities that are there to play tennis, quoit tennis or deck quoits. We're going to leave Orontes here and join Strathaird on a line voyage from Colombo through to Egypt. Both Strathaird and Strathmore were originally built with 3 funnels. 2 of these funnels were removed after the war. We're going to join some passengers as they go ashore in Colombo. The quay here didn't change very much and was still very much like this in the 50s and 60s when I was at sea. But I've been back since and it's all gone. As the passengers leave the jetty, some will walk into town, some will take a rickshaw, and others will be more adventurous and get on a tram. It was always very hot in Colombo, and here we see passengers getting on a rickshaw, maybe to take them out to the Goldface Hotel for a nice cool drink. The more adventurous board a tram. And the ladies, as usual, are doing some shopping, this time for lace tablecloths. And now we're going to head off to the seashore to watch the Ceylonese fishing. These fishermen are fishing off the beach, others prefer to do so from boats. And now it's time to go back to the ship. The next port of call is Aden before we sail up through the Red Sea towards Suez and the Suez Canal. Passengers have the chance to go ashore again by tender, and they may just wander through the duty-free shops, or they might take a trip out to the crater, one of the main attractions in Aden. About 4 days later, the ship passes through the Suez Canal. Strathaird arrives at port side. Bumboats gather around the ship and will sell their wares, mainly leather goods made from camel hide. But if you want a better selection of goods, then Simon Arts is the shop to go to. And it's not too far to walk across the pontoons to the shore and then up to the shop. On the dockside, a gilly man shows off his skills in the hope of attracting a crowd of onlookers. Some passengers have taken the opportunity to take a trip to Cairo. You see here boats on the Nile. It's interesting to see these camels processing through the main streets. It's not too far by car to go out to the pyramids at Giza. Tourists are encouraged to take a camel ride. Others would prefer to take a pony and trap to get close up to the Sphinx and the pyramids. Back in Cairo, there's a chance to have a last look at the various sites and mosques and museums. And then we're back in portside, ready to sail for the Mediterranean. A more modern sister ship, the Strathmore, is on her journey to Sydney. Strathaird would then have made her way into the Mediterranean, possibly to Naples and then Marseille or Toulon. But I've shown some sights of the Bay of Alexandria here, and passengers boarding a train to progress with their journey. We saw Strathmore just now in Port Said on a line voyage from the UK to Australia. We're now going to join her on a cruise to the West Indies. The first port of call is Madeira. The ox cart is a very popular way of getting around the town. Madeira is very mountainous, and the best views are to be had from the top. There are two ways to get to the top. One is by cable car and the other by funicular railway. The next port of call is Jamaica. Here you can have a look around the municipal parks, or go out into the countryside and see the sugarcane growing. It would appear that people like to carry things on their heads. And here we see a cottonwood tree. Then it's back to sea and a chance to enjoy the warm sunshine on deck, just looking at the sea or sitting in a deck chair, or being a little bit more energetic and playing deck quoits. And if that makes you hot, then there's a chance to cool off in the swimming pool. We are now in Trinidad. We're going to take a trip around Trinidad by car. Here you see some banana trees and some of the village housing. There's plenty of sunshine to dry the washing. And you'll notice that the buses are all air conditioned. I'm sure, having travelled as a youngster on ships myself, that this has been a wonderful experience for these girls in this film. Soon they'll be back on board. Maybe a chance to talk to the captain, and then to take part in some of the swimming and deck sports, whilst the ship crosses back across the Atlantic towards Southampton. We're back to Otranto, this time for a Mediterranean cruise. The ship heads out through the Bay of Biscay. It's clearly essential to dress up for the occasion. Our first port of call, and the port officials come on board. Once the ship is cleared, passengers are free to go ashore. And my guess this time is that we're in a Spanish port. This was the mid-30s, and there were a number of fascist youth movements in Italy, Spain and Germany at that time. It's interesting to note that the traffic was split about 50-50 between motorised vehicles and horse-drawn carriages and carts. The passengers attended back to the ship in the ship's launches. Somebody's getting some good practice in for the horse race meeting, probably later that evening. Others enjoy a dip in the pool. Otranto is in Valletta, Malta. This ship fascinates me. The funnel suggests to me that she's either a German or Italian warship. Ashore, the popular gharry will take you from the dockside up into the main town. The ship's boats are hoisted aboard and a sailor is swinging the lead to measure the depth of the water under the ship's keel. Once again the ship is anchored and the passengers are going to come ashore by ship's launch. This time we're in Italy. My apologies, I know the film jumps a little hereabouts. It's due to the sprockets being damaged, but I thought it worthwhile to include these scenes. And now we see the ship in the Bay of Naples. The ship then progresses around the toe of Italy and up the east coast. A day at sea provides the opportunity for the crew to exercise at lifeboat drill. The staff commander and chief officer are locked in deep conversation. Now here's a strange scene, one I've not seen before. Two passengers on a Carley float in the pool tried to knock each other off with poles wedged beneath their knees. Maybe it was found to be a little dangerous. And now Otranto approaches Venice. Once docked, she's surrounded by gondolas. So we're now going to have a chance to go around the canals, firstly by gondola and later by motor launch. The famous or infamous Bridge of Sighs. Feeding the pigeons in St. Mark's Square. The gondolas are now in the Canale della Giudecca. And here we see the Rialto Bridge on the Grand Canal. And here we see a funeral procession, probably a common sight in Venice, but I've never seen one. Well, after a couple of days in Venice, it's back to sea. The ship now heads up towards Istanbul. This will be the furthest port of call away from the UK, and the ship will turn around and call at other ports on its way back to Southampton. We're going to join Orion on a Mediterranean cruise. The ship is seen here leaving Southampton. On her way out of Southampton she'll pass the Queen Mary. Beauty, they say, is in the eye of the beholder, but to my mind there was no more beautiful ship than this ever in the world. Orion and Queen Mary were contemporaries, built and launched about the same time. Whilst the Queen Mary was much more traditional, Orion's interior was in the style of Art Nouveau. Now here we see the passengers all lined up for lifeboat drill with the heavy cork life jackets which were still in use in the 1960s. All the drill's over, there's time to relax by the pool. Three days later, Gibraltar. In the Bay of Gibraltar we see the battleship Nelson. Passengers would have a few hours ashore in Gibraltar before returning to the ship. The next port of call was Malta. We catch a glimpse of an old steam tug with paddles, some youngsters diving for coins, and the traditional Maltese gondolas touting for fares. As with so many ports before the war, the passengers will once again go ashore by ship's launch. After a very hot day ashore, it's nice to be able to relax around the swimming pool once back on board. The next port of call was in Tunisia. Having spent the day ashore admiring the sights, there's a chance on the wharf to pick up any late purchases. Yet another port of call, and this time we're in Greece. Some of this film was originally shot in colour. The colours faded, but you do get a glimpse of it from time to time. The staff commander entertains a small party on the bridge. One of the youngsters gets the chance to have a go at steering the ship. I have absolutely no idea what they're doing here, but it seems to be good fun. And it's also part of the deck sports. And so Orion makes her way back to the UK. And we're going to join Orcades, Orion's younger sister, tragically lost during the war. A couple of black and white shots of the ship just to start you off. These were taken at some other time. And then the film changes to colour as we approach Stockholm through a myriad of little islands. one of the many royal palaces. Fun and games around the pool, and another popular game, part of the aquatic sports. On the cruise we called in at Tallinn, Estonia. And now something else that we don't see these days, and that's ships' boats being launched for the passengers to race each other in teams. A picture of the winning team. Our last port of call in this particular film will be Warnemünde, from where the ship will proceed through the Kiel Canal to the North Sea. And we see a group of Hitler Youth, a sign of the dark days to come. I trust you've enjoyed part 4 of Cruising in the 20th Century. Part 5 will begin on a happier note after the war.